Here we go with pack 1, and we already have quite an interesting decision. Best card in the pack is Tyrant's Invocation, but there's also Fairy Invaders and Spelltrine to contend, and white, red and green have quite the powerful commons in each color available, so everybody is going to get a powerful card out of this pack, but more people are going to get blue cards. However, I think that Tyrant's Invocation is so much better than the alternatives that we just have to take it here and then try to force into blue as much as possible, if we get a chance, of course. Cover and Fear, the black card to note here. And in general, I would prefer it if we had passed a double blue card, because it's easier to get people out of colors they have a single double casting cost card of, but we simply didn't have that choice here. Now the rare is missing, and now we have the pack that has a lot of good white cards. Healer of the Pride, Oblivion Ring, Aven Squire and Attendant Knight, all very good. I suppose that Oblivion Ring is better than Healer of the Pride, which should be better than the cheaper creatures in most white decks, but I can see going full out aggressive and picking Aven Squire over Healer of the Pride. Personally, I haven't been too impressed with the Squire though. The decks in M13 just aren't that all in on Exalted, which makes each individual Exalted creature a bit worse than, for example, in the Shards of Alara block. Going to go with the most powerful card here, Oblivion Ring, and we are going to have to see what tables from these first two packs and what that means for our draft. And once again, non-common cards are missing. The Tome isn't really an option here, I believe. It's a nice card in the right decks, but we have, well, for once we have to try to cut our colors, and second of all, it's just, well, a card that we can easily do without, especially if we end up in blue, then card draw is available differently as well. Now here I like Essence Scatter and Archaeomancer. I don't like Gardens of Akraza, and Morg Flunkies are certainly a contender for the strongest card in this pack. However, the Flunkies don't really go with anything I have so far, while Archaeomancer is insanely good if you have an invocation already. So I'm going to try to solidify my blue, which is certainly a risk, given that I might not end up in blue if the, well, if the packs look like this, but I think it's worth trying. Next up, there is a pretty late Geyser at 4th pick. I believe it should usually go between 1st and 2nd out of most packs, although the rare always makes things a little more difficult. Griffin Protector is fine but not exciting, and Essence Drain as well. It costs 5 and it doesn't kill the best creatures in the format, so I actually like it less than Turn to Slag. Sometimes it's nice that you gain some life as well, that you can burn out opponents, but in the decks I like to draft, it's actually not that great of a removal spell. I think we have to go with the Geyser here because we haven't seen any white signals apart from that second pack, which was just very full, and I like the X spell a lot better than Griffin Protector. Next up, there's only Scroll Thief and Priced Elephant. Safe Passage can be okay, but it's certainly not a great card. So that's actually a pretty weak pack for us. We might play Priced Elephant, but green is usually not the color you splash, so I would most likely pick up a 4 mana 3/3, which is not very exciting. Scroll Thief is fine, although I'm not the greatest fan of it, but it's probably my best bet to make the next pack contain more blue cards, and I'm not missing out on anything really. There's a trading post. I'm not really in love with this card. I don't have any artifacts, and even though my deck is shaping up to be controlling, I don't think it's a card that M13 limited decks certainly, necessarily need. So I'm looking at something else. Wild Guess is okay, but I'm not sure about the red yet, and blue has divinations anyway. So I think I'm actually going with Negate here. While Water Cursor is nice, I already have a Scroll Thief for early defense and to make attacking less profitable for my opponent. And I kind of like Negate a lot with, in any blue deck, because core set limited is often decided by non-creature spells. In fact, I believe it's more about non-creature spells than expert formats, where it's much more important to have a good curve of efficient creatures. Here I'm going to continue the plan of just taking blue cards now that we have the invocation. And Ansam is actually a great pickup here. Crippling Blight, pretty late, but people are still not valuing it very highly, which I think it should be valued higher. And that's a great sign, seeing a second Ansam here, also some white and blue cards, although this pack looks like it must have been very strong. If these cards are the ones that people didn't take, then we probably missed out on a pretty spicy pack. I'm going with the second Ansam here. One could make an argument for Winddrake, but Ansam is going to be an important early tempo play. It helps to get through cards like Scroll Thief, and it's great with Archaeomancer, so I'm really happy to have two, and I'll also play three. From the starting pack, the good cards are all gone. Fairy Invaders and Spell Twine are the blue cards that have been picked up, but we still get an Encrust, which means that there's probably up to 3 blue drafters at the table. We might have gotten somebody out of blue to our left, though, so I think that's fine and certainly playable. Now, Heal of the Pride seems to be quite undervalued by a lot of people. It's not great in the most aggressive decks, but another thing about this core set is that even the aggressive decks usually take games to a longer range of turns than in expert sets. So in expert sets, I feel like the game is basically over earlier than in core sets. This core set just has a lot of answers to cheap threats, and usually your 4-drops still have a significant impact on the game. This is different from some other formats where you just play a 2-drop, a 3-drop, follow up with a removal spell, and your opponent's 4-mana creatures don't really get to shine at all. Here I think it's between Fire Elemental and Rain of Blades. I'm going with the Fire Elemental. It's very rare that I play Rain of Blades, so don't think that's worth it, even though we might end up in blue-white. And I do like Safe Passage quite a bit. So currently we have the option of going blue-white, blue-red, or in extreme circumstances going for a blue-red deck splashing Oblivion Ring, but hopefully that won't be necessary. And that's a great pack for us. It has Rock's Faith Mender, which is nice with Healer of the Pride, but there's also Chronometon, which is a very good defensive creature on turn 1, but also acts as a threat later. Fogbank is really, really good, and if you have Ansam to protect it, it gets even better. But I think it's slightly worse than Chronometon. By picking the Colorless card here, I also get a better chance at wheeling one of the blue cards, maybe a third Ansam, which I would play. We won't see the Rock's Faith Mender again, almost assuredly, but I think that Chronometon is so much better than the 4-drop that we have to take it here. Yeah, on the wheel there's probably not going to be anything in here. Tricks of the Trade is okay if we pick up another Scroll Thief, but it's not really something I want to play. And this pack is significantly worse. Basically we have the option between Primal Clay and Essence Scatter, and Essence Scatter has to be the better pick. We don't really need the Hill Giant or 2/2 Flyer, and paying 4 mana for a 1/6 wall is fine, but there's certainly more exciting things. And Essence Scatter does counter a lot of the exciting things, which we can't handle so far. Now, Priced Elephant hasn't really gotten better, since we still aren't planning on playing any forests. So I think we can take a short look at Mind Sculpt and then probably decide between Ring of Thune and Crusader, which is an easy choice because we only have one white creature. But I don't think this is a Mind Sculpt deck. We aren't really that great at controlling the board yet, and it's much more likely that we are going to need to play at least some creatures to win the game. So I'm going with the Crusader here. Even though it's pretty weak currently, it has the highest potential out of these cards. Ring of Zethrid is not in our colors, and so are most of the other cards. I don't think this card is playable. I've seen it being tried, and I wasn't impressed at all. Alluring Siren from M13 at least had the potential to blow out some people in the early game, but this 3 mana 1/1 just doesn't work, I believe. Now, I could pick up a Hydro Surge, which can be sideboarded against green decks, especially those with Prey Upon. Alternatively, I could just pick either Sentinel Spider or a Ring of Zethrid, because I probably don't want to play against either. And the Spider seems like the more problematic card. I'm not planning on playing this in a non-black deck, I guess, which could be another reason to go for the Ring instead. But let's take the Spider. And Arctic Haven should easily be the best card in this pack, exactly what this deck needs. And we get another pack of quite a lot of options. This could be the time where we pick up a Water Cursor. I don't think we have an Elixir of Immortality deck. We don't really have that much removal or late game power yet. So the question is, do we want... I don't think we want another Safe Passage, because we are really looking to get some creatures now, and Safe Passage is almost worthless without creatures. So let's see what our curve looks like. I'm almost inclined to take a second Harbor Serpent, because this deck really needs some late game cards as well, but I'm fairly certain that there will be another one going around, and Water Cursor is a pretty nice 3-drop because it trades with 4 toughness creatures, which is important in this format. Here Glorious Charge and Battleflag Eagle aren't really great, which means that I'm going with the Elixir to board in against the mill deck. This is an interesting decision between Vedalken Entrancer and Rewind. I really like Rewind a lot, and we do have quite some uncomes to make it pretty good. Quite some instants to make it pretty good. And actually, once again, playing a 4 mana 1/4 is just not that exciting. I don't believe that we are going to win games by milling, so I'd rather have another counterspell. This is the pack we opened, and of course there isn't much in there. The Unsum also didn't wheel. Going to pick up a Silver Coat Line. Hopefully we don't have to play it, but it might be a necessity given our lack of 2-drops. I feel like Divine Favor is usually better than Hydro Surge, but this doesn't look like a deck that has many targets for Divine Favor, while Hydro Surge could be quite interesting as a sideboard card. So do some of these cards. I kind of like Downpower in the more aggressive blue decks, but these are hard to come by, and we don't have the evasive power needed for that. So The question is if Guardian Lions are even debatable. I think they are actually. It's kind of the replacement for the Primal Clay we didn't take, which does cost 1 mana more, but the mana cost in our non-aggressive deck is actually not that important. And we do get another late game card, even though it's not a Harbor Serpent. Let's take out the trick here and pick up some more unplayables. Now, this is not in the main deck. Crusader is probably in. I like that it offers a way to get big the longer the game goes, even though it might be unexciting the turn you play it. Here there's another Gazer, which is not for us. The mana base certainly doesn't support double red cards at this point. Knight of Glory is probably the best card for us. We don't have any 2-drops yet, and it's great against black. The alternative would be to pick Essence Scatter, which I really like a lot for its early and late game applications, but we might even see another one or the same one come back, and Knight of Glory is just a very efficient package. Next up we could pick an Evolving Wilds to splash some of the other cards in this pack, but of course that's not how it works. So I think we are best off picking another creature for our deck, which would be either Welkin Turn or Griffin Protector. And this is a interesting decision. I mean, Griffin Protector might deal some more damage and is a little better on the defensive if your opponent has 3 toughness flyers, but there aren't that many 3 toughness flyers around in this format. Whereas Welkin Turn only blocks the flyers, but it also presents a reasonable clock. I think in expert sets, if you are going for a controller strategy, you would always pick Griffin Protector instead of Welkin Turn. In the base sets, it's somewhat counterintuitive, but I feel like this Welkin Turn will do more for our deck, which I know probably sounds completely off, but hopefully this will turn out to work as expected. Now, here we have a bunch of utility creatures. War Priest of Thune as a way to deal with enchantments that aren't that prevalent in this block. I prefer to have answers to equipments, which we have in a way in Ansam and Oblivion Ring. We can go for one more beatdown flyer, probably Aven Squire over Winddrake, but I could actually see picking Winddrake here for its defensive capabilities. And the real alternative is a second Archaeomancer to buy back the different cards we have. Given that we have 2 Ansams and an Invocation, I think we have to be a little bit greedy here, considering our curve, and pick this great late game card. Captain's Call isn't a card I'm usually excited about, but of course with 2 Archaeomancers, every 4-drop, every instant and sorcery is more interesting, and it's also a great 4-drop to play after Crusader of Odric. I think I like it better than Entrancer here. Once again, I'm really not the biggest fan of Vidalcan Entrancer. Its best application would probably be to mill myself to make my Archaeomancers better, and 1 force in this format just don't really win games. Next up, there would be a second Captain's Call, which is probably not interesting for us, but I could see playing a second Harbor Serpent, especially if our opponent is playing blue as well. I also don't want to play in the matchups where our opponent has the Harbor Serpent and we don't, so I think that's an easy pick. Here we could do with a War Falcon or pick up a Shore of Valor as a trick. And this doesn't look like a deck that also needs a Comet trick in addition to all the other spells we already have. So let's do the Wall Falcon check. We have the soldier tokens. The Crusader is a soldier. And Knight of Glory. So that's only 3 cards. Given that we can also block with War Falcon, it's probably still a little bit lacking to play this as a defensive creature. I'm going with Show of Valor here. With so many instances, it's nice to have a wide range of effects to draw from, and your opponent keep your opponent guessing. I'm not going to play the Silvercoat line. As you can see, we already have to cut some cards, and Mind Sculpt might be important in Control Mirror. A second Scroll Thief is interesting. Usually I'm not the biggest fan, but with what we have so far, it could easily make the main deck. It's also sometimes it's not really great to play against a Scroll Thief if you have a slow hand and your opponent just starts with a Scroll Thief and an Unsum, then you're already in trouble. These Unsums also make the Scroll Thief much better, of course. Here I'm going to go with Evolving Wilds. Don't think that we are going to have to play it, but maybe we will anyway, just for stuff like getting more islands into play. And the best card here is certainly Veilbone, very good in the black control decks and with Wild Guess, but that's not something we need. And I'm going to pick the Mass of the Pearl Trident here, pumping up our Scroll Thieves against other blue decks, probably only in the sideboard, but a nice interaction. Here I'm just going to pick the Dark Favor, and then we should be ready to build our deck. So let's see what we have here. The most important question is going to be the creature count and the overall composition. Don't know if Safe Passage makes it. Oh, Healer of the Pride and Captain's Call, also quite a nice interaction. We have 22 cards and a great curve, I have to say. So this looks like it might work out nicely. I think we might even want to cut the Encrust. I've said it before, it's not really a good card, but it does work as a removal of some sort. Now, what this deck certainly needs is at least one more late game spell, and maybe even 2. So I'm looking at least one Harbor Serpent, and then maybe even another one, a Silvercoat Lion. Yeah, I'm not too sure about if we can fit in another 6-drop. But currently our late game consists of returning spells with Archaeomancer and a single Harbor Serpent, which just isn't that much. So I really like the Crusader, Healer, Captain's Call, Archaeomancer line, and I don't really like the Entrancer, as I've said before, especially given that we have 2 more spells that make tokens in this slot. So, in fact, I like Entrancer worse than a second Harbor Serpent already. Now, this would be a setup with 13 creatures and 2 spells that act as creatures, so it's actually a reasonable amount. If we wanted another 2-drop, it would be probably the Master over Silvercoat line. The Master is a little harder to cast, but it does pump up the Scroll Thieves, so that's quite relevant. And that would make us even better against blue decks, and probably a little worse against the rest, because Master of the Pearl Trident is just not very exciting otherwise. Although I guess it's fine if you draw it with a Scroll Thief, and you can catch your opponent off guard. Now, I don't really want to cut another creature for the master, and I really don't like the encrust. I think we can use our other spells as more efficient ways to control the board, and encrust is also pretty awful if you want to hit with Scroll Thief, for example. So I think if we do this, we actually have quite a nice deck, and one where I am in fact going to include Evolving Wilds, because we have now several cards that are interested in a lot of islands. We want 2 islands on turn 2. We want islands to activate this, play this, return a blue spell, cast a blue spell, and then we want 5 islands on the battlefield for Harbor Serpent. So this is actually looking like it has both a good early and a good late game, and I really like the spell composition with several options in the sideboard depending on the matchup. So the only question remaining is how many planes we actually need if we play Evolving Wilds. In general, this would be an 11-6 mana base, given that we have 6 white cards. 6 or 7 white sources are perfectly fine. 11 islands, 11 blue sources is also enough to cast these spells, but if we could include a 12th one with Evolving Wilds, that would also be fine. So I'm basically debating between 6-10 and 5-11. And the decision is going to hinge on Harbor Serpent. So this means that if our opponent isn't blue, it's actually going to be very hard to attack with it. We would need to have drawn 5 islands, and that's actually kind of tough. Given that we will have so many blue spells and we want to cast multiple of them, but only 6 white spells, and most of the time we are going to cast at most 1 white spell, we certainly want to draw only islands after we've drawn the first planes, and that's the most compelling argument to reduce the number of planes to 5, giving us still 6 sources with Evolving Wilds. And thankfully, all of these cards are still fine if cast later in the game. Of course, Knight of Glory and Crusader get a bit worse, but that's the case in general for early creatures, and you can't optimize everything at once. Looks good. Let's see how it goes.